for the inaugural address.
Dr. Ramdas Pai, Chancellor, Professor Arvind Kumar, the who's who of American studies in India represented here, students of the university, fellow scholars. In over 40 years in the Indian Foreign Service, I traveled to the farthest corners of the world. But I'm a bit ashamed to confess that this is my first visit to Manipal. Well, better late than never. And I want to thank Professor Arvind Kumar for giving me this opportunity of being here. In my mind, Manipal had always been associated with the legendary Pai family, and I got to know a few more details last evening from Dr. Pai. I also knew about how this great establishment, this great educational institution, has been built through philanthropy and private enterprise, and proudly remains a private enterprise. This has also been a rich cultural area of India, one of the most beautiful corners of our country, famous for its temples, for Yakshagana, and the most delicious Udupi cuisine. I was also told that in Manipal you find the smartest girls in India. I hope that is true. So I am delighted to be here. I have a minor dilemma here. I'm sorely tempted to join the School of International Studies delegation here because, as was pointed out, my first academic encounter with the United States actually happened in 1960 at the Indian School of International Studies under the guidance of the legendary Professor Venkatramani. I think Venkatramani was the father of American studies in India, and I had a strange relationship with him. I thought he was very fond of him. I think he was. But when I opted to join the civil service, he was so annoyed that he didn't speak to me for 20 years. And then, on the eve of my first posting to the United States, he unannounced dropped in and gave me his blessings. So he was a large-hearted man, and I think he was right in foreseeing that the United States would be an important player in our national life, about 50 years ahead of most other people in India. I therefore think that this workshop is actually for me a tribute to Professor Ramani. I was asked by Dr. Arvind Kumar to give an overview of Indo-US relations, and I thought it would be best to join that overview with my assessment of the Modi government's approach to the United States and the forthcoming visit of President Obama at the end of this month. But you really can't appreciate the spectacular expansion of Indo-US relations in the last 15 years without knowing a bit of the background, what happened earlier. What happened in the 50 years preceding the opening of relations in 2000 was that we had a very frigid and often hostile bilateral relations with the United States. So much so that the late Senator Moynihan, who was also American ambassador to India, once commented that these 50 years, which coincided with the Cold War, were half a century of misunderstandings, miscues, and mishaps. Now, this is not the occasion to go into why this massive misunderstanding took place between two of the world's largest countries. In my view, there were four major factors that created this mistrust. And in my shorthand, I call them the 4 Ps. And Professor Vijay Lakshmi, of course, often reminds me of my 4 Ps. The 4 Ps are the 4 problems. And those problems were political ideology, private enterprise, Pakistan, and proliferation. These were the 4 major issues that divided our two countries for nearly 50 years during the Cold War. Now, much has been done to remove this massive misunderstanding, and many of these 4 Ps have actually disappeared from the agenda of the two countries. But remember that in 1998-99, it took the then External Affairs Minister Jaswant Singh and the then Deputy Secretary of State of the United States, Strobe Talbot, 18 months of intense dialogue to resolve many of these issues. And that is what led to reducing the mistrust deficit. And that is what prepared the ground for the visit of President Bill Clinton in 2000. It was an American presidential visit for the first time in 27 years. So the recent history of Indo-US relations is actually divided in two phases. The first 50 years after independence and the last 15 years. And one is called BC, that is before Clinton, and the other is called AC, or after Clinton. Clinton's successor at the White House, George W. Bush, was actually the real author of the Indo-US strategic partnership. I came to know President Bush quite well, but I never quite understood what is it that he found so fascinating about India, because he grew up as a kind of regional politician. He was exposed only to Texas. His father was president and ambassador in China, but I don't think in China he ventured beyond Chinese cuisine and understood much about international affairs. But from the beginning, when he came to the White House, he thought of a strategic partnership with India. So when you look back at the George W. Bush years, after the fiascos in Iraq and Afghanistan, the shattered legacy of George W. Bush is still being discussed. But I maintain that so far as India is concerned, George W. Bush was the best president that India had in the White House, because he not only walked the talk, he made sure that all the heavy lifting was done to get the Indo-US nuclear deal through the Congress, and also made the great effort required to get India one time, one country exception in the nuclear suppliers group. So I think we owe George W. Bush that recognition and that gratitude. But guess what? President Obama came with an intent to demolish everything that his predecessor had done, but kept intact only one element, and that his policy towards India. So we are fortunate that a succession of presidents have seen India in a positive light, and that is what created this new wave of enthusiasm for India. So the great wall of mistrust, as I call it, during the first 50 years, stands demolished. And indeed, under the current prime ministership of Mr. Modi, the US has actually been elevated to the level of the principal strategic partner of India with any country. And this is something akin to what we had during the Cold War years with the Soviet Union. It is that kind of partnership which, let us remember, lasted for nearly 40 years. Now, one of the objectives of this workshop is to identify the areas of convergence and divergence. And I propose to do it by briefly giving you an illustration from two documents. And that will perhaps not require any explanation as to which are the areas of convergence, divergence. Now, during the 5 decades of the Cold War, it was assumed in both Washington and Delhi that we had no strategic convergence between the two countries. The noted American scholar Steve Cohen has once commented that during those days, India was an object of charity, not strategic importance for Washington. So it is this perception that had to undergo a change in the last decade of the 20th century. So this is the illustration I want to give you. In March 2000, the US National Security Council was directed, and this was on the eve of President Clinton's visit, to prepare a note a one-page note to advise the President on the importance of India. And the title of the note, which has since been made public, was 10 Reasons Why We Need to Engage India. So I will summarize the 10 points which President Clinton got as the objectives of the new policy towards India. Number one, need to improve relations with an emerging global power of the world and the world's largest nation in the beginning. This was the changing perception in the United States in the beginning of the 20th century. Number two, shared democratic values. Number three, maximize relations with one of the world's largest economies. Number four, move India towards the global non-proliferation mainstream. Number five, joint efforts on global issues like terrorism, narcotics, and the rights of women and children. Number six, work together to meet challenges to regional stability. Number seven, protect the global environment with clean energy and other initiatives where India's leadership is essential. Number eight, join the global campaign together against polio, AIDS, and other pandemics. Number nine, upgrade US ties with world-class Indian players in the vital area of information technology. And number 10, strengthen links in education, culture, and people-to-people exchanges. Quite clearly, this was the distilled wisdom of the American strategic community on 10 ways in which India could serve American strategic interests. Now, unfortunately, on our side, we don't have an official culture of presenting our strategic interests with such clarity. Nevertheless, inspired by this NSA document, I personally prepared my own 10 reasons why India needs to engage the United States. And therefore, I will read out my 10 reasons why America is important for India. Well, number one, we need more American investments in India, which will enable us to accelerate our economic growth. Number two, a higher level of trade with the US, which is the largest trading partner of India. Number three, access to high technology, of which the US share in the global total is more than 40%. Number four, energy security for India through cooperation in nuclear as well as alternative sources like solar, hydrogen, clean coal technology, coal bed and seabed methane. Number five, joint action against jihadi terrorism. Number six, access for India to the state-of-the-art military technology that is available in the United States. Number seven, balancing China. In my view, the dominant strategic challenge for both India and the United States is China today. And this, I think, is the bedrock of our new strategic initiative. Number eight, working together to reform international institutions and help India to find its rightful place, especially as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Number nine, keeping the peace in India's disturbed neighborhood. And number 10, a helping hand from the US for India to become a global power in the same way in which the Soviet Union helped India to play a global role during the Cold War. So even though these ideas from both sides are more than 15 years old, you can see that there is a lot of commonality between the two statements put side to side. There is no clash of interests. There is actually a remarkable convergence of strategic interests that we see between our two countries today. Now, this is not to suggest that there cannot be divergences or differences of interest. India significantly declined to join the US in its war in Iraq, differed from the US on sanctions being imposed on Iran, is currently distancing itself from the Western sanctions against Russia. It is understood that if our strategic interests clash with those of the United States, we will not and we must not surrender our own interests. Therefore, divergence, convergences have to be understood in this perspective. Now, let me come to Mr. Modi's foreign policy and his approach to the United States. As I have studied Mr. Modi's foreign policy in the past 6 months, I have concluded that it is based on 3 overall objectives. And these objectives are, number 1, prosperity for India, or what I call Samruddhi, which means rapid economic growth for India. Number 2 is security, or what I call Suraksha. It is the protection of India's territorial integrity and the promotion of India's strategic interests. And number 3 is status, or Swabhiman. If you have studied the BJP election manifesto, it says that if they come to power, a resurgent India must find its rightful place in the Committee of Nations. That is one of Mr. Modi's goals, to elevate India as a global power and to project his own image as a global statesman. So, it appears to me that Mr. Modi is applying these 3 criteria to all our strategic partners. And it also seems to be evident to me that the only country that has met all the 3 benchmarks is the United States, which is why I feel that the US has been elevated to the rank of the principal strategic partner of India today. It is in this context that we need to evaluate the importance of the Modi visit to the United States in September and the forthcoming visit of President Obama later this month. Let me talk about the Prime Minister's visit in 2014. If you recall, by the time of UPA 2, the strategic partnership with the United States was struggling to remain relevant. Dr. Manmohan Singh's coalition management problems made it impossible for him to meet American expectations. The 2012 budget created waves of anger and disappointment amongst India's partners abroad, and particularly in the United States. That budget had all the elements which created mistrust with foreign investors: retrospective taxation, enforcement of unachievable local procurement rules, and a very rigid stand on issues concerning intellectual property rights. The UPA 2 was unable to make any progress on economic reforms. And finally, India's economy began to falter with high inflation, widening fiscal deficit, and the rupee losing its value. The US business community, which was the strongest supporter of the strategic partnership with India and the nuclear deal in 2005, became the community that was pressurizing the US administration to impose sanctions against India by 2012-2013. The final straw was the Devyani Khobragade incident, whose mishandling on both sides plunged relations between our 2 countries to the lowest level since the nuclear tests in 1998. So, visiting the US against this background, Mr. Modi had 4 major objectives in mind. 1, to repair the damage to the relationship and to re-establish the priority of the US in Indian foreign policy. Number 2, to declare his own priorities and expectations from the US. Number 3, review the extensive range of bilateral relations. And number 4, jointly with the US, plan the future structure of the relationship. Did he succeed? I think he did. I think it was one of the most successful visits by any Prime Minister of India to the United States. measured in terms of the intensity of the dialogue and the range of common issues discussed. In terms of results, there was significant progress in three broad areas. And this is how in the Foreign Office we classify the agenda in terms of bilateral, in terms of regional, and in terms of global. The bilateral is the most important one because it involves transactions between the two countries. So let's see what was achieved in the September visit on bilateral issues. Take economy and trade. We have already reached the level of $100 billion of bilateral trade exchanges. The goal is now to raise it to $500 billion by 2024. And this is achievable. Then there was US commitment to invest in the infrastructure sector, especially in Mr. Modi's favorite projects, the smart cities, the bullet trains, a clean India, and a digital India. Let's go to the defense and security sector. It was agreed that a 10-year defense cooperation agreement, which expires in June, is going to be renewed. The US agreed to Prime Minister Modi's Make in India policy and proposed joint developments in the defense sector for co-production and co-development of the latest technology in military affairs. The Americans welcomed Mr. Modi's government's decision to raise the FDI, the foreign direct investment, in the defense sector to 49%. And there is a provision that it can go up to 100% if required. The US has agreed to treat India at par with its closest partners because one of our grievances had been that while they opened up the transfer of technology, there was still an area that was denied to us. Now the Americans have said, there is no denial, everything is available to India. Agreement was reached in the more intensive cooperation in intelligence sharing, on terrorist activities, and in combating the new challenges in cyber security. And significantly, the US, during Mr. Modi's visit, specifically banned as terrorist organizations those terrorist groups based in Pakistan which were targeting India, which is the Lashkar-e-Toiba, the Jaish-e-Mohammed, the D Group, and the Haqqani Network. Let me turn to the regional issues and what was achieved. Mr. Modi and President Obama exchanged notes extensively on the developments in Pakistan, China, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. For the first time, there appeared to be a convergence in the US and Indian approaches to the problems in Afghanistan. And there was a further convergence between India's new Act East policy, which is an extension of the Look East policy, and President Obama's policy of rebalance in Asia. Finally, let me turn to the global sector and see what was achieved. The US and India reached an understanding to achieve a compromise in the WTO on the trade facilitation agreement. When people in India thought there was no compromise possible, it was worked out in Washington, and we now have compromise language that meets India's concerns, and therefore the WTO is now ready, the trade facilitation agreement is ready to be signed. The US has sought India's cooperation to conclude a comprehensive climate change agreement, which is going to be discussed in Paris in December this year. The US has reiterated its support for India as a permanent member of an expanded UN Security Council. I think apart from this, Mr. Modi showed tactical brilliance in identifying 4 separate major constituencies in the United States: the US business community, the strategic or the think tank community, the Indian diaspora, and the US establishment, which includes the White House and the Congress. Now let me turn to some speculation about the Obama visit at the end of this month. what is likely to be the agenda for the summit taking place on 25th, 26th January. The agenda itself is a highly classified document and is perhaps receiving its finishing touches as we are discussing now. But having handled many such agendas in my official life, I can safely predict that it can't be very much different from the agenda that was prepared for the Washington meeting in September. The major items, I think, will be the following, and again we follow the pattern of the bilateral, regional, and global. Bilateral, if you trade and economic, I think negotiations will take place on a bilateral investment treaty with the United States, which will be a major step forward. There will be identification of major projects for US investments in infrastructure. The issues arising out of intellectual property rights in sectors like pharmaceuticals, films, and other products will be seriously discussed. And I think Mr. Modi is anxious to find some kind of meeting ground with the US business community. There will be taxation issues which will be discussed, and Mr. Jaitley will have to give a lot of clarification on what the government's policies are. And I'm pretty sure that there will be a detailed discussion in explaining the ordinances to President Obama and his team, because ordinances are not something that are easily understood by democracies in the West. On the bilateral side, in defense, I expect that there will be significant forward movement. The renewal of the 10-year defense cooperation agreement is expected to be announced during the visit. Proposals for co-development and co-production of high technology defense technology items are likely to be announced. There is a possibility of an opening for the Americans in the 126 medium-range fighter aircraft, because we have run into serious trouble with the French on the Rafale. And both the Americans, and not only the Americans, the British, the Europeans, the Russians, now having hopes that if the government will suspend the Rafale deal, then other companies can come forward and a new round of discussions can take place. If the Americans can bag that order, that will be a big coup indeed. Then we turn to energy, which is an area of priority for both Obama and Modi. There will be a movement on the nuclear liability law to enable US companies to actually come and consider constructing nuclear power stations in India. There will be cooperation in green, clean, and renewable energy. And an issue that was perhaps discussed but not announced in September is the possible export of shale oil and natural gas from the United States to India. There are still some hurdles, but we are hoping that we will be able to achieve that. Then in security, there will be closer cooperation in counterterrorism, especially after what happened in Peshawar and what happened in Paris and other places. We expect that the US will put pressure on Pakistan to crack down on the Pakistan terrorist groups which target India. And Mr. Kerry made a pretty strong statement on this, even in Islamabad when he was there after going from Ahmedabad. On the regional side, we expect exchange of views and perceptions on the developments in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Maldives, and generally in the neighborhood. Security of the Indian Ocean area, I think, is due to be discussed. China is the big elephant in the room. Whether they announce it or not, there will be discussions on China. And the convergence of the Act East and the rebalance in Asia. On the global side, I think with the trade facilitation agreement out of the way, President Obama will be putting pressure on India to join him in concluding a global climate change agreement by the end of the year. Now, I thought before concluding, or instead of giving any concluding remarks, I will address some of the questions that are frequently raised about the Indo-US partnership. And so I will take the 5 most frequently asked questions which I encounter and give you my take on how they can be answered. Question number 1, is India compromising on its non-alignment and its strategic autonomy by joining a partnership with the US? To that my answer is, in my view, India was never quite non-aligned. The example, 1971, the security agreement with the then Soviet Union was quite clearly not in line with either the spirit or the letter of non-alignment. And during the entire period of the Cold War, we were tilting towards Moscow. And so I don't think we're strictly non-aligned. However, I have risked my reputation because once I said this in public, and there was a protest note to the External Affairs Ministry saying that this retired Foreign Secretary says non-alignment is dead. And it came from the Islamic Republic of Iran. And our minister had to give a statement saying, these are my personal views, and of course the government believes in non-alignment. That is strictly untrue because, as I know, Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government rejected non-alignment without saying so and substituted by a system of strategic partnerships. And this is what we have today. So don't be too worried about non-alignment or strategic autonomy. These are very theoretical concepts. In practice, I don't think we should take it seriously. Question number 2, is the USA a reliable partner? To tell you the truth, the US doesn't have a great track record of being reliable. And this is my experience of dealing with the United States. They often don't keep commitments, and they give the excuse that they can't help it. Their Congress passes laws which override other commitments. We have a long catalog of instances where the Americans broke their commitments. They broke the agreement to supply fuel for the Tarapur project in the mid-80s. They left a joint development program for the light combat aircraft. They left it high and dry in the middle of the development of the program, and we were left to complete it with our own resources. Every time there's a conflict with Pakistan, the Americans stop the supply of spares for military equipment. So how do you think the Americans can be reliable as a partner? But the point is, as I see it pragmatically, there is no such thing as a 100% reliable partner. We thought Moscow was a reliable partner, but of late, Moscow has also been backing out from commitments and not meeting delivery schedules and overcharging us and so on. So my answer is, let us be pragmatic. If we need the United States today, and if we have a new level of trust with the United States, I think we should go along with this partnership and hope for the best. Question number 3, should India be drawn into American disputes with other countries? It's a legitimate question. And my answer is certainly not, unless it is in our national interest. If the US has a conflict, let's say with China or with Russia or any other country, I don't think India should automatically join this. We must remember, we are a strategic partner, we are not a military ally. Question number 5, why join the US, which is a declining power? Why not join a grand alliance with China and Russia, who have been politically closer to us in the past? Question marks. Well, the answer is, since China is our principal strategic threat and an ally of Pakistan, I don't think we can ever join China in any kind of meaningful alliance. Even if a succession of governments have proclaimed friendly relations with China, I take that with a lot of salt. Russia is struggling to remain intact as a global player. So do we really want to join a China-Russia alliance and hope that it will help our interests? Now, the other argument is the US is not quite a failing state. It is the richest and militarily the most powerful country in the world today, and is going to remain so for at least the next 50 years. Perhaps we can make different choices after those 50 years are over. But as of now, I think there's a powerful agreement for remaining as a strategic partner of the US. And the fifth question is, President Obama is a lame duck president. So why should we not wait until his successor? Why should we waste this opportunity on somebody who's going out of office? The answer to that is that we must understand the American system. American presidents are known to have made the boldest decisions, especially in foreign policy, during their second term, when they're technically lame duck. These are the powers of the American president under the American Constitution. Besides, we are not dealing with an individual. We are dealing with the institution of the President of the United States. And as we have seen, a succession of presidents from Bill Clinton onwards have honored their commitments of their predecessors. So let me put this as bluntly as I can on Indo-US issues. You may like the US, you may hate the US, you cannot ignore the US. And as long as we have a convergence of interests, let's go along with this. Thank you for your patience.